You're not overreacting. You're buying controlled. You ever walk away from a conversation feeling drained, confused, guilty, and yet nothing bad was said? No yelling, no insults, just tension, subtle pressure, invisible weight. And you wonder, am I just too sensitive? But what if you weren't overreacting? What if you were being manipulated? Not with threats, not with rage, but with silence, with tone, with perfectly timed pauses that turn your kindness into obligation. This isn't emotional chaos. It's emotional choreography. And you've been dancing to someone else's rhythm. Let me show you how it feels. You say, no. They sigh. They say, I just thought you'd understand. Suddenly, you feel cold. You feel like the bad one. But nothing wrong happened. Except this. You walked into their emotional bait. This is what we call shadow manipulation. It's subtle. It's polite. It's effective. And that's why psychological immunity isn't about being numb. It's about staying awake, not taking every signal at face value, not reacting because you were trained to react. It's about noticing the trap before you step into it. Because in today's world, the most dangerous threats were empathy, and the sharpest manipulation feels like a gentle request. So ask yourself, what if your empathy is their favorite weapon, and what if your silence is the only thing they can't twist? If you've ever felt emotionally hijacked but couldn't explain why, subscribe now, because what's coming next won't just expose the game. It'll immunize your mind. They don't need to overpower you. They just need to steer you emotionally. And most of the time, you won't even notice the steering wheel isn't in your hands anymore. Let me tell you about Jessica, marketing manager, smart woman, but every family dinner left her exhausted, not because of drama, because of invisible pressure. Her mom would say, "It must be nice to have a career that matters more than family." No accusation, just a seed. And suddenly, Jessica was defending her choices. That's how they operate. Not through attack, but through invisible entry points. The first entry point is emotional pressure. Not yelling, not chaos, just subtle, emotional priming designed to throw off your inner compass. You come home late. They say, "Wow, must be nice to have freedom." No accusation, just a seed. And suddenly, you're defending your choices, not because you're wrong, but because the moment was engineered for guilt. And it works because it feels familiar. From childhood, from family, from past relationships. You've been conditioned to fear disappointing others. So, they don't argue with logic. They argue with your inner child, the one desperate to be enough. The second entry point is urgency. They don't just want an answer, they want it now. They create panic. They text, "I need to know where we stand." If you care, you'll respond. Now you're cornered, not by truth, but by the illusion of a ticking clock. Urgency is one of the easiest ways to bypass your defenses, because fast decisions are emotional decisions, and if they can rush you, they can move you. Third entry point is framing. This is where power hides. Because framing isn't what's said. It's what's allowed to be said. They set the context, the rules, and you start reacting inside their invisible room. You get asked, do you still want to make this work? Or are you giving up on us? Notice the trap. Both options imply you're the problem. You don't get to say this dynamic is toxic. You only get to defend yourself from a false choice. The fourth entry point is narrative hijacking. They don't just want to win the argument. They want to control the story. Make you the villain. Make themselves the victim. Make your boundaries look like cruelty. Someone says, you're just like all the others. And you respond by proving you're not. But now you're in their frame. And the more you talk, the deeper you sink. This isn't just psychological warfare. It's spiritual attrition. A war of slow disorientation. So here's the rule to remember. If you don't name the frame, you're trapped inside it. You can't fight what you can't see. And the strongest manipulation is the one that feels like your own guilt. They don't come through the front door. They find the softest part of you, and they press, not because they hate you, but because they know it works. Every manipulator, every emotional controller, every passive-aggressive player relies on one thing: your willingness to react. But today we stop being predictable. We build a system, a psychological immune system. Quiet, invisible, unshakable, and like every strong system, it has layers. The first layer is emotional distance. Think of it as the glass between you and the chaos. You can still hear the noise. You can see the fire. But it doesn't burn you anymore, because you don't touch it. This distance isn't disconnection. It's awareness. You recognize that someone else's emotions are data, not instructions. They scream. They cry. They shift tone. They dramatize. But that's not your cue to jump. It's your cue to stabilize. When they bring the heat, you bring the cold. Not in cruelty, but in command. Take Marcus, a software developer. His manager used to guilt-trip him into weekend work. You're the only one I can count on. If this fails, it's on both of us. Old Marcus would panic and say yes. New Marcus pauses and says, let's schedule a meeting Monday to discuss realistic timelines. Emotional hijacking depends on you absorbing. And you're done being absorbent. The second layer is strategic delay. This isn't hesitation. It's calculated stillness. The moment someone pushes, you pose. Not forever. Just long enough to interrupt the pattern. Imagine being accused. Instead of rushing to defend, you lean back. You breathe. You ask, what's really being said here? Not just the words, but the emotional payload behind them. When you delay, something magical happens. They lose rhythm. They expect speed. You give silence, and now they're off balance. The third layer is narrative awareness. This is where most people fail. They argue inside the wrong movie. They play a role they didn't audition for. Someone says, you're just like all the others. And you respond by proving you're not. But now you're in their frame. Stop. Pause. Ask yourself, what role are they trying to assign me? Victim, villain, savior? Once you see the story, you're free to step out of it. The fourth layer is detachment reflex. It's not something you explain. It's something you become. The reflex to drop out emotionally the second you sense the bait. They want a response. They want friction. They want the spark. But instead, you go still. Dead still. And that stillness, it terrifies them. Because they no longer have access. Imagine someone texting, "I guess you don't care enough to reply." Instead of clarifying, defending, apologizing, you let it hang, unanswered. And in that silence, they reveal themselves. You're not being cold. You're being immune. Because immunity isn't resistance. It's clarity. It's the ability to see what's being done without letting it enter you. If this reminds you of someone who always leaves you exhausted, hit like. You're not crazy. You've been conditioned. You don't always see the trap, because it doesn't look like a trap. It looks like a question, a concern, a request. But the goal isn't conversation. It's control. Welcome to advanced immunity, where you don't just defend, you redirect, reverse, and disrupt. Let's start with guilt reversal. When someone says, "So you're just going to walk away," they're not seeking truth. They're seeking submission. Because, in their frame, you owe them an explanation. You owe them discomfort. You owe them your peace. But you don't. Your response. So, you're upset. I chose peace over argument. You don't defend the exit. You reflect the absurdity of the expectation. Now they have to sit with that. Not because you argued, but because you didn't. Second, fake choice, disruption. This one's everywhere. You're told, "So, what's it gonna be? Are you going to apologize? Or keep acting like nothing's wrong?" It sounds like a question. It's actually a trap. A binary prison. Two options. Both disempowering. But here's the move. You reject the frame. Not emotionally. Strategically. Your voice still. Your tone flat. Your words, "I'll choose neither." Let's reframe. This is a power move. Not because it's loud, but because it breaks the illusion of authority. They were running the script. You cut the projector. Third, pressure, deflection. This one works when someone turns up the heat, rushing you, forcing decisions, weaponizing time. Why haven't you replied yet? This can't wait. You need to decide now. But urgency is a psychological hijack. It makes you feel like not acting equals failure. So you act poorly, under stress, and regret it. Instead, you step back and say, "I can sense this is urgent to you." But urgency isn't clarity. Now you're no longer inside the storm. You're narrating the weather. That single shift from participant to observer is psychological immunity in action. Fourth, energy neutralization. This is where you win by not changing. They raise their voice. You don't match. They speed up. You stay still. They expect a reaction. You deliver reflection. You're not lowering the tone. You're not escalating it. You're removing your energy from their loop. The result: they overextend, they spiral, and eventually they expose themselves. Not because you fought, but because you didn't join. Here's a real example. Sarah's coworker kept undermining her in meetings. Subtle comments, eye rolls, passive-aggressive questions. Old Sarah would defend herself publicly. New Sarah waited until after the meeting and said, "I noticed some tension during my presentation. Would you like to discuss it directly?" The coworker had no script for that. Because Sarah didn't take the bait, she redirected to accountability. Then comes the final weapon, the power pause. This is the silence that cuts deeper than any argument. The kind that makes people flinch, not because you're angry, but because you're done. When someone says, "So you're really going to act like I'm the problem?" You don't respond. You don't flinch. You let the weight of their words land on them. They'll try to fill the silence. They'll try to reshape it. They'll try to bait you back into the emotional loop. But you've excited. And now they're talking to themselves. The power pause doesn't end the game. It shifts it. Suddenly they're not playing against you. They're confronting their own behavior, their own contradictions, their own tactics mirrored back with no distortion. These aren't comebacks. They're counterframes. You're not reacting to what they say. You're replacing the context they want to trap you in. You don't fight fire with fire. You expose the source of the smoke. Because once you shift from defense to diagnosis, you're no longer inside the manipulation. You're observing it. And that's when they lose. There's a level beyond tactics, beyond redirection, beyond counters. It's not about what you say. It's about what you no longer need to say. This is psychological immunity, not the ability to win every battle, but the ability to never be drawn into one that isn't yours. That's the shift. From reaction to recognition, from playing the game to unplugging from it entirely. Think of your emotional world like an operating system. Every time someone provokes you and you instantly react, it's like they have your admin password. They're in, pushing buttons, installing emotions you didn't choose, running programs you never approved. But what if you took that access back? What if you were the only one who could log in that sovereignty? That psychological immunity at its core. You're not emotionless. You're not disconnected. You're undecodable. Imagine someone says, "So, you don't even care anymore." Old you feels attacked, feels the need to defend, to prove you do care. But new you, the sovereign you, recognizes the trap, because underneath that sentence is a baited frame designed to make you explain yourself on their terms. But when you pause, when you see the move and let it pass without attachment, you've just overwritten your old emotional code. This is psychological detox, flushing out the residues of other people's control. Not just their words, but the subtle stories they've planted in your nervous system. Stories like, "If I don't respond, I'm cold. If I don't explain, I'm guilty. If I walk away, I'm the bad one." You didn't choose those narratives. They were installed by repetition, by guilt, by fear. But detox begins with this one act: non-reaction. When someone tries to project shame, pause, breathe, observe. Don't defend. Don't reject. Just witness it. Because the moment you observe without absorbing, you reclaim your power. Marcus Aurelius said it simply: if someone can provoke you, they own a part of you. Let that settle. Every time you lash back, they own a part of you. Every time you scramble to explain, they own a part of you. So stop trading pieces of yourself for temporary peace. Start sitting in the discomfort without collapsing into it. This is the quiet immunity that doesn't show up in words but in presence, in stillness, in detachment, in the calm that unsettles those who can't control you anymore. Here's your daily training. Next time someone guilt trips you, or rushes your answer, or frames a choice as urgent or binary, don't reply. Just pause. Look. Let the silence breathe. Because in that breath, you've just rewritten part of your code, and they'll feel it. You're not playing. You're not reacting. You're not programmable anymore. You're still. And stillness. Stillness is the highest form of resistance. If this didn't just make sense but made you see people differently, subscribe. You're not just learning, you're building your shield. You've come a long way. From seeing the manipulation to resisting it. From flinching on reflex to standing still by design. This wasn't about becoming emotionless. It was about becoming emotionally sovereign. Owning your space. Protecting your state. Choosing when, how, and if you respond. Because the people who control you, they don't chain you. They frame you. They don't shout. They nudge. They don't fight. They simply wait for you to hand over your power voluntarily. Most people don't see it. Because it's not loud. It's subtle. It's patient. It's strategic. But now you've built a different architecture. You've identified the psychological viruses. You've reinstalled new boundaries. You've learned that calm is not surrender. It's dominance in slow motion. Let me leave you with two truths. They don't fear your anger. They fear your silence. Because silence means you see the game. And when you see the game, you stop playing by their rules. And they don't want your yes. They want your need to explain. Because the moment you explain out of fear or guilt, you've surrendered positioning. You've lost the frame. But from this point forward, you engage on your terms. You speak on your timing. You act from clarity, not compulsion. That's the new law. No reaction without reason. No access without consent. Let their urgency crash against your quiet. Let their manipulation fall apart because you no longer respond to it. This is your shield. This is your edge. And most importantly, this is your new normal. Here's your 24-hour challenge. Do not respond immediately to anything emotionally loaded. Pause. Breathe. Ask, is this mine? Or did they hand it to me? And if it's theirs, hand it right back. With silence. Because stillness isn't passivity. It's immunity. And immunity is the most evolved form of power. If this didn't just make sense but uninstalled something inside you, subscribe now. This isn't motivation. This is mental reprogramming. And if someone you care about always reacts before thinking, send this to them. Let them build their immunity too.